Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. So, how many of you remember getting a pre-test on Monday and a post-test on Friday and having to do some activities in between, taking a test, and either you did really well because you knew the words and it wasn't much of a challenge, or you were able to do well on the test, and then by Monday you forgot all the words. Well, we're here to set the record straight. We have two super duper researchers with us today who are going to tell us everything we need to know about spelling and how important spelling is to reading, writing, everything to do with literacy. We have Brennan Chandler and Jessica Toste with us here today. So the meta-analysis that the two of them worked on is entitled an analytic review of spelling interventions for students with or at risk for learning disabilities. And they are covering 5 decades of spelling intervention research. So I'm going to say that again, 5 decades, and we still don't know what we're doing. So we need to really clear things up today. Dr. Brennan Chandler is an assistant professor of dyslexia at Georgia State University, and we will have the full bio on our episode and in our wonderful newsletter that I hope you will all subscribe to. We are really filling you in on all the latest and the greatest, and you could get some detailed step-by-step information that we don't always cover in our episodes. So definitely subscribe to the literacyview.com newsletter. Okay, and we have Jessica Toste, an associate professor in the Department of Special Education and distinguished professor at the University of Texas at Austin. So welcome to the Literacy View. Thank you so much for being with us today. And so here's my first question to you. Actually, I'm taking it right from your article. And it says, the time is right to elevate spelling from a neglected skill to a strategic instructional lever that supports literacy development. Could we talk about why it's been neglected and how do we elevate it to something that is so important for our listeners to know about? Because we have lots of teachers in the audience, we have parents, we have researchers like yourselves, and we want the scoop. So it doesn't matter to us who starts the conversation rolling, but we want to hear from you.
Do you want to start, Brendan?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been neglected a little bit by what you said at the beginning of the episode, Faith. So thinking about spelling typically historically as this like weekly Friday list that you get at the beginning of the week. I know I had to do this in school. I'm sure many others had to as well, where you study, cram, maybe do some rainbow writing, do some fun activities. I love doing like the fonts on Microsoft Word and doing different fonts for each letter for the spelling list. But then by Friday you take the test and then really the words are gone, right? You're not really retrieving them and practicing them. And so lately, I think, especially when I was, teaching in the classroom, came a little neglected during more of the balanced literacy days as well. Like we have the test, let's not really think about it. It's becoming this almost archaic skill to some, I think, especially now with generative AI and all the tech assistance that we have. But really in the article that you're describing, we're really thinking about how we can recenter this into the science, really the overall science of reading line science movement, to think about spelling really as this, like you said, lexical lever, this word level lever that it improves kids' spelling skills, but also really helps them crack the code, the alphabetic principle, and also improve their word reading skills as well. It really has this great transfer effect on word reading too. And so that's sort of how we're thinking about it and bringing it back in. Writing is a tool for thinking, and really spelling is a really nice tool then for cracking the code, especially in early literacy.
Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I ditto everything Brennan said. I think also, just to add on to that, spelling can serve such a powerful tool both for our instruction, so it can help students really deepen their understanding of words and become more efficient in reading words and reading text. But I also think of spelling as a really important diagnostic tool for us as teachers. It tells us a lot about what students understand about words and what they understand about the reading instruction that they've been getting and how they're able to apply that and understand it within the context of words. So I think spelling gives us a really powerful tool that we can use diagnostically as teachers and instructionally to help students become better readers.
So Judy Boxner, my beautiful co-host, Judy, did you have a pre-test on Monday and a post-test on Friday? I mean, we're Brooklyn girls. I know I had that as a student. And then I did the same thing as a teacher. I'll admit it. That's what we did. I am guilty as charged. I did the whole spelling routine, pre-test, activities, post-test. And I saw that the words were not being held in memory. What about you, Judy?
All right. So I did take spelling tests. That will probably date me. I'm 50 years old. And yes, I did take many spelling tests as a little girl. And I usually got 100 on my spelling tests. I was one of the lucky kids. But I will say that there were so many problems with those spelling tests. I have to say something positive. I have not seen the traditional torturous type of spelling tests in classrooms that I support in years. I see dictation, I see phonemic awareness, phonics activities, but I don't see spelling tests like I took as a little girl, which were like random words that a teacher took, just gave me, made me memorize. Those words weren't meaningful. They were totally isolated. They didn't really follow any patterns. And it was just basically little Judy had to memorize those words. And I practiced and I read those words a million times. And then I just had to produce on a spelling test on a Friday, had no meaning. I mean, I do have flashbacks to having like a word like there and there on that test. And, you know, there were little things happening like that, but really not a lot of substance, not a lot of deep vocabulary work, not a lot of work with orthographic mapping when I was a little kid. But I will say I haven't seen those kind of spelling tests given in classrooms in probably at least, I would say 15 to 20 years, Faith. Probably at least 15.
Yeah, so neither have I. So now I'm going to throw it out to both of you. Since Judy and I have not seen those types of, pre-test activities, post-tests, what I've seen is that we've just abandoned spelling, period.
Actually, I have to say something. Actually, I'm wrong. I haven't seen them, but I do work with private clients that go to private schools that maybe don't have the most up-to-date training. One in particular that comes to mind is a student that I have that goes to Catholic school. And I don't know how much training those teachers get in terms of the science of reading. And some of those kids that I work with do still get what sounds like traditional spelling tests. Not the schools I coach in, but when I've worked with private clients, I still hear a little bit of talk about those yucky ones.
So it might still be around in some schools, but I think for the most part, it's either not taught, it's not really, as you said, it's neglected. So in your article, you mentioned that in as little as 15 minutes a day, spelling can help with reading, writing. What do those 15 minutes look like? Could you both describe for our teachers out there how they can maximize 15 minutes a day, or if they had a little bit longer, 15 to 20 minutes a day of doing really good spelling work?
Yeah, I think a lot of the answers that we're going to have, we're going to say it depends. I know Jess will say that. And I think starting with, I'll take the early literacy portion of this, and maybe Jess can help fill in with sort of as we get through literacy development, but thinking about early literacy K1, really, thinking about what really matters is that encoding instruction, right? The opposite of decoding. We really want to make sure that we're training kids in their GPCs, that they're being able to understand that those correspondences, how to read those sounds, but really the phonemes to retrieve when they're reading those, looking at those sounds, and then also what phoneme or what graphemes to spell when we articulate those phonemes. So really thinking about explicit instruction in phoneme grapheme correspondences, practicing writing those, spelling those words with those correspondences, extending it even to some, dictation, some sentence writing as well, and things like that, which a lot of great K2 phonics programs, right, already have embedded in them. We'll talk about how some kids probably need some more extra, like the kids that we work with maybe need a little more than what the K2 program's giving them as far as their spelling instruction. But really, in many of the studies we looked at, some only spent 30 minutes of the whole study on spelling, some up to 2,000 minutes. So really, we said that is there's not like a great dosage answer about how much time, but generally doing some routines where you're teaching explicitly, you're having them practice writing those words, and really focusing on early literacy on those phoneme grapheme correspondences in there as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that just to say, I think the clearest evidence we have is in the early grades showing that using a phonemic approach to spelling instruction, where you're focusing, like Brennan was describing, on letter sound correspondences, has a very clear benefit to not only spelling, but to students' reading development. I think as kids develop then and progress, things become a little bit more depends on the context, depends on what the goal is of instruction, depends on the learner, depends on the word that we're teaching. So I think we see as students, as we kind of move through the grades, we want to rely on different kinds of approaches to spelling instruction. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how we coded 5 different approaches in this meta-analysis. But as students get older, that sort of phonemic approach of focusing on direct letter sound correspondences won't always play out in the same way, because words become more complex. The patterns aren't as predictable. They need to know how to access those words and how to sort of recognize unified parts of words. And so we often will transition and take different approaches to spelling and reading instruction as students get older so that they can tackle more complex words.
Can I ask something? So I actually work in some schools that have phonics programs, and they do have a dictation portion, right? And I see kids writing sentences, I see kids spelling words. Is that enough, or do kids need an additional quote unquote spelling program? Because when I first started teaching back in 2000, I actually had books that looked more traditional. They were and I think they're research and evidence-based books. They're in my basement right now. I'm not going to run there and get them. But they were more traditional spelling type of programs. Is the spelling that's happening in our traditional phonics programs enough spelling practice? Or do kids need more? Because I know Faith just mentioned time. And a lot of our literacy blocks, especially in schools right now, because so much is coming down teachers' throats between making sure you squeeze in this and that. And it's becoming like a squeeze in kind of situation, which is unfortunate. Is it enough? Is it enough for kids? That's my big question. Problem of practice.
I have a few thoughts, and I'm sure Brennan does too, but I'll start. So I do think we get into this problem where you are trying to squeeze all of the important things. So this is important, this is important, this is important. And if everything comes with its own 15-minute program, which you're lucky if everything's just 15 minutes, you've run out of time very quickly to do it. I think there's a couple of answers to this question of what is enough? I will start by saying one of the things about this meta-analysis is that the spelling interventions that were included were all interventions where the majority of the time was spent on spelling tasks. So over 50% of the time was spent on spelling tasks. So we were really trying in this meta-analysis to isolate true spelling-focused interventions, but it is very common in most reading programs, especially phonics-based instructional programs. Spelling is and encoding is a part of instruction. So it's actually becomes a little um, it becomes a little tricky because, and when teachers are very knowledgeable too about word reading instruction, you often bounce back and forth between decoding and encoding. So you'll sort of work on letter sounds, you'll work on writing those, you'll work on patterns and words, work on spelling and writing those, kind of going back and forth. So I I don't think I have a great answer of like, is that enough time? I think that is one area where we actually need more evidence to figure out how much of reading intervention time, especially when students are developing as word readers, um, how much spelling time will benefit them the most in order to optimize kind of their word reading development.
Yeah, and I think
Brennan has a better answer.
Thanks for that, Jessica. Thank you.
That was the best answer we're going to get. I'm going to go in a little deeper about the kids that I think about a lot, that we think about a lot, Jess and I, those kids with reading disabilities like dyslexia, learning disabilities, who really have persistent difficulties. And what I've been seeing with the graduate students I train and some of the schools that I've been working in just with research projects and collecting data on spelling is that typically those kids are going to need a little extra boost in spelling. That core phonics program might not be enough, especially because spelling demands such cognitive, really precision in how we're spelling. The demands of retrieving those, all of those things that are happening. We have to segment the sounds, retrieve the exact correct grapheme for that. Let's say vowel team, we have maybe 5, 6 options. We have to sequence those letters in orders. It's really tricky for those kids who often have some working memory, deficits, who have a lot going on there phonologically as well. So they do probably need a little bit extra, especially I've been thinking more about like, we coded also an orthographic approach to spelling instruction, which is really focused on spelling rules. We have some really high utility spelling rules, like the 1-1-1 doubling rule, the floss rule, right? Those that are common that kids might just need some.
Can you go over those rules for our listeners, Brennan?
Ooh, we have a few of them. I think some of the common ones, like English words that end in V or J, the 1-1-1 rule, right? One short vowel. We want to double the, I'm going to lose all my train of thought here with all of those. But we can send out some ideas for that. I will say though, that those kids with learning disabilities or dyslexia just need more practice and more opportunities to respond and practice those rules that are high utility still, that we might not be able to give them or provide them in our core phonics instruction. And the last thing I'll say about that is we ran a study a few years ago, it's under review, but we gave kids with dyslexia over 6 opportunities to spell words and practice and provide feedback, and they still couldn't master the word after 6 or 7 trials. So that really is another indicator that these kids that have dyslexia, have disabilities, might need some extra support and practice outside of that core.
So I have a lot of thoughts right now. My brain is buzzing with so many things I want to ask you about. But as you were speaking, Brennan, one thing I thought about was what you said with working memory.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to think of cognitive overload, working memory. And, we have programs where kids are getting checkouts and spelling holds them back from progressing in their reading. And so I could tell you, having, I'm Wilson certified, I've gone through OG, and, kids do not progress evenly in reading and spelling in these phonics programs. And often they are held back because they can't always produce in spelling. And so what do you say about that? I mean, my thought is, let's get them reading. And if spelling lags behind, then what you said, we need to then give them more and boost that area with some additional instruction. What are your thoughts from the research?
I mean, I'm sure folks might disagree I think Brandon and I agree, but others listening may disagree. But I mean, I think, to me, instructionally, the goal is for us to develop and support readers. I want my students to spell. I want them to be proficient spellers so that they can communicate well in writing, so that they don't have a stressor of like how to spell words that holds them back from expressing themselves in writing in the words they want to use. But really, the spelling instruction is like the word we used at the beginning of this, it's a lever to sort of develop word efficiency, word reading efficiency. And so there often is not, they don't develop even across time. They certainly reinforce, word reading and spelling reinforce each other a lot over time. They rely on very similar underlying processes. But we also know that even many adults are very efficient readers and not great spellers. And it seems, we wouldn't want to put those folks back in like remediation to learn how to learn spelling because those skills develop differently over time. So I think the goal, the focus is really like, what do we want our goal to be here? If the student's spelling and they're struggling so much that they really are not writing, that it's impacting their writing, it's impacting their ability to write sentences and text and stories and journal entries and essays as they get older, or if it's causing them great stress about doing those writing activities, then we do want to continue to support their spelling so that they can get more proficient with that skill. But I definitely see the goal to develop students as very proficient readers, and the idea of holding them back in foundational skills programs because they're lagging behind in spelling, even when they've developed their reading skills, seems a little like going against that goal of developing students to become as proficient as they can be.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in on CSC meetings where they don't have a spelling program and they don't have a separate spelling, itinerary. So the only thing they have in the school are these explicit phonics programs. And so they'll offer kids who could already read the words, like a Wilson program.
Right.
And they'll take them all the way back to a low step when they, it's really the spelling that's holding them back. Judy, you and I both work with kids one-on-one. Have you had that experience, and where there are kids who have really grown in their reading, but the spelling lags way behind, and then in the school, they are still offering like step 1, step 2 of Wilson when they could already read these types of words and multisyllable words, but they're being held back because of spelling?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I've had some private clients that I work with that definitely the kids read way better than they could write and spell. But in my own private practice, I've given so much attention to giving equal respect to reading and writing. It's like an area I'm so passionate about that I haven't seen such a mismatch in my private practice, because every lesson when I worked with kids privately, I gave the same devotion.
I'm not
Let me just finish. Faith, let me just finish. It's important because it's my story. Because I've given attention to those students, I haven't seen such a big mismatch. Now, in terms of classrooms that I've supported, I've definitely seen more of that mismatch. And that might mean in the core instruction that's happening in the classroom, maybe there's not an equal amount of attention. I think also because the science of reading has given so much attention to reading. And, people like, Leslie Lord and Think SRSD and different things have given attention to writing, but I don't see that transfer as much in classrooms in terms of like that explicit instruction with writing or giving that same attention to writing. Or sometimes I'll see, the reading block, the teachers gave it so much gusto But then when it came to writing time, oh, we have 15 minutes left. We're going to just squeeze in writing or do a little bit of writing. And I think that, teachers needed, and obviously not you, Faith, right? You've been doing this for a million years and you know these things inside out. No, not a million. But I think that it doesn't come as naturally. And some people, maybe it's their first year teaching or second year teaching, and they don't know that what's taught maybe in the phonics block needs to also be talked about during the writing block and also during writing time and during dictation time. And I know that, if a kid is struggling or a kid is not struggling, the more I see it here and we talk about it here and we also see it here, it starts to all make sense. So yes, I've seen it all, but for me, it became an area that I was very passionate about. And I didn't see such a mismatch in my private practice. Am I seeing a mismatch in classrooms? 100%.
Yeah, well, I could tell you privately, I'm not even thinking about that. I was thinking about the kids that I see, especially in the upper grades. The early grades, there's not such a disparity.
I work with a lot of the K to 2 bracket.
Okay, so I'm really talking about older kids where their reading has come along and they're being held back because of spelling. So here's my question to both of you. And I know you know what I'm talking about.
Hey, but I want to hear what they have to say about what I just said, because maybe they have something to add. I'm curious to hear what the researchers have to say.
I can speak from a non-researcher standpoint, just working with a lot of my graduate students lately that are in classrooms that are getting their structured literacy. We have like an interventionist program, and a lot of the K2 teachers, which we were talking about, Judy, they have this, right, their phonics scope and sequence, and they are like, I'm going to teach my spelling the same way I'm teaching my phonics, my reading skills, and I can't deviate from that if I need to support my spelling a little more. That's what I'm finding. So we know, like Jess said, we talked about this developmental lag between word reading and spelling. We're going to have a lag. Like, we all can read more words, right, than we can spell perfectly. I'm sure we all have those words that we can't spell the best way, that I still struggle with some words too. So we're going to have that lag, but then that scope and sequence, we really can think about them together as we're teaching reading and writing, or reading and spelling skills in early literacy in K2 together. But for kids that need that extra boost in spelling, we can go back and support those skills and not, hold them in where they're at in their word reading and their reading sort of instructional levels and whatnot. So we definitely want to keep moving them forward with that. And that scope and sequence might change just a little bit because it's going to lag and they're going to need some extra practice.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing I was thinking about, Judy, when you were talking about being in classrooms and not sort of transferring the things that are talked about in the reading block to the writing block and sort of having integration across those instructional components. I think the other thing about spelling, this kind of goes, we've touched on this already, of like, why don't we spend time on spelling, is that spelling takes a lot of time. It takes more time to spell 10 words than it does to read 10 words. You can read many, many more words in the amount of time that a student is spelling that many words. So I think there is, especially when we think about kids who are in intervention and who are already struggling and need extra support, there's sort of a lot of decisions made about trade-offs for time. Where is the biggest bang for your buck going to be instructionally to support students in progressing? And so because spelling takes more time, often people will say, well, I'm going to spend that time doing that extra 5 minutes, more reading text, more talking about text. And so I think sometimes we devalue or undervalue spelling because it does take away time and we don't see an immediate kind of like benefit to it. Because it does take longer to develop too. I'm not going to spell a word with a student 2 or 3 times and then in a month they have mastered the spelling of that word every time they write it. Whereas once I've read a word many, many times, students start developing a stronger memory for that word. Not always, but often.
So I know you've seen this debate because we talked a little bit about it before we started. What do you think about this whole idea of integrating a multi-component reading, ELA curriculum, a lot of people think you integrate everything from the beginning. And then what does that look like if that is so? Or is it something where we slowly build, starting with, let's say, phonics, and then build upon that and bring in morphology and bring in those pieces, because this is a hot topic. And
yeah, you're setting us up, Faith.
I'm setting you up. I'm setting you up.
You're spicy. Faith is on fire. Go, Faith.
So, look, I have to tell you, that's why we wanted both of you here.
Yeah.
You got us.
I kind of eased into it, but I want to get now into the point where I could really press my BS button.
There it is. There it is.
For the BS button. I wanted cheers also, but I really need to get the lowdown on this, because this is a hot topic. I need people who really know the research to spell it out, because a lot of people are quoting airy. Maybe they're misquoting other things, embellishing some things. Again, I want it to come from both of you.
I'll say one thing and then I'll turn over to Brennan, and then maybe I'll come back after his. So I think the two sort of approaches that you just laid out, of sort of like an integration of multiple linguistic layers simultaneously from the start of reading development versus a more incremental layered approach, I actually think both have benefits in different ways. And I actually do, and this is such a scapegoat answer, but I do think it's true that I don't think either is incorrect. And I think the bigger context to that is that it depends on the student and it depends on the level that they're at. And I think for students who have the students I think about who have really significant difficulties with reading, sometimes when you're working on certain words or certain skills, it does need to be not necessarily layered in terms of holding them back before they move to the next thing, but focusing on one thing at a time. And then, integrating maybe within a lesson or within a week or within a month or a program of study. But really kind of focusing on them, understanding certain skills, understanding the way words work in certain ways, and then building onto that. But I do think the idea of integration is important, and something we don't do effectively enough in reading instruction in general, sort of exposing students to the many different parts that make our language interesting and unique and difficult. And I do think I focus a lot on older students. So I focus on students who are moving into reading more complex words, multisyllabic words, and the integration that happens when students are working on those words looks different than when students are learning CVC words in K1, by definition of the words and how they're structured.
Brennan, I want your spicy answer. I read your spicy response, and now I want you to give us what you think right here, no holding back. Come on, Brennan, you can do it.
I'm going to say first to bring Jess into this. We wrote that, we co-created that response. So she helped me respond. Thank you, Jess. As a junior, faculty member, my doctoral advisor still helps me out a lot here. However, I will say, just thinking about the meta-analysis, right? I agree with what a lot of Jess said. We know that kids can draw on phonology, orthography, and morphology from the early years. We know they can draw on it. But what we found in our meta-analysis, when we took all of those 59 studies, over 2,000 students, we analyzed those all together. What it really shows is that really focusing on the latter, that approach that you talked about, Faith, where we're not integrating everything all together at once, the research really does support more of that, staged, layered, sort of depending on sort of grade level approach for reading and spelling. But really, when we think about the integration of all those, had pretty good effects on spelling. It was statistically significant. So integrating what we call in the paper multilinguistic, so multiple sort of approaches to spelling, the phonemic approach, orthographic, they could have more than one approach. That helps kids' spelling outcomes. However, it did not transfer to reading outcomes, though, based on all the studies that we looked at in our meta-analysis. So we cannot say with any confidence there really that it is going to transfer to their word reading skills if we are integrating all of these from the start. And we gotten a lot of emails about that and a lot of questions about that too. I just really think not a lot of research has honestly been done in that area. There was another spelling meta-analysis that came out in 2020. They found the same thing. They looked at adults and kids with dyslexia. It was focused on that. And they asked the question, should morphology first be there? And they said, no, we don't have the data to support that. And my tune would change if we did. Hey, I'm really like approach agnostic, program agnostic. It's really about what the evidence is showing. And we don't have, I think, evidence to say that we can multilinguistic spelling, reading instruction is going to have that impact on word reading skills at this time. Not to say it doesn't or it can't, but just right now, I can't say that.
Faith, where's your cheers button? You got the yes one out.
I'm waiting for him to finish. Yes, both of you, big cheers.
Yeah, we got the cheers.
So
guys, that's a big compliment. The cheers button doesn't come out on
I'm really honored. I don't think I've seen the cheers button really, so that's exciting.
You do both.
Okay, okay.
But
I'm waiting for the
now,
BS.
I want in plain English, I want you to call BS in one line. Come on, you could do it. What is BS here? So that I know that it depends. I know that's the PC way of saying it, and I get it. But in K&1, the younger grades, let's be clear, call the BS. Come on, you can do it.
Jess, can you try? Call BS.
I mean, I don't know what I'm calling BS on yet, but maybe it'll come to me in the way. But I think the only thing, at least from our work and other work that has been replicated by this meta-analysis, is that the only thing we know for certain, if we're talking about word reading outcomes, the only instructional approach that improves word reading outcomes consistently in our work is teaching a phonemic approach that attends to letter sound correspondences. And we don't find evidence that integrating multiple linguistic levels simultaneously transfers to word reading in the same way.
That was it. So anybody out there, please, we heard it from people who studied this for 50 years. Oh, wow. I think my BS button's dying. I think I need to.
Oh, no.
Who's that person out there? Who sent it to you?
I think it was Lindsay. She sent me a new BS.
And
You know what? Wait, Faith, but I'm taping from the living room and my BS button is upstairs. I can't get my act together on the Literacy View. I'm just trying to make it through the day, Faith.
All right, Judy. So we've talked about this, just what I asked Jessica and Brennan, and because there's a lot out there. And we have said to each other, it's hard to imagine people debating this in K&1 in particular, when we think about cognitive overload and working memory and their emergent readers. How do you do everything and integrate it from the beginning? And from what we're hearing, it really doesn't have that research behind it in the beginning, especially. What are some of your thoughts with this?
So one of my thoughts is, what does this mean for me in the classroom? What am I prioritizing? What am I going back? Because I know, like, for instance, we've had many debates about, phonemic awareness, right? The evidence shows that you need to connect it to letters. The second I heard there was evidence for that, even though I was using a certain program, I knew to shift. So based on what you're telling me today, what should I make sure that tomorrow is happening in the classrooms that I support? Oh, Faith, you have fireworks coming down. Faith, I don't understand why you just had firecrackers coming out of your head. Faith, and you're muted while you have the firecrackers coming out of
Because
your
I
head.
put my thumbs up.
So
and then-
Faith put a Faith, you are something today. You're very funny today. All right. So yeah. What does this mean for our classrooms tomorrow?
I think really depending on the grade level, I think we'll go back to K1, early literacy, really focusing, you think about a phonics-based approach to reading, well, the same thing for spelling, really emphasizing if we're teaching kids certain letter sound correspondences, making sure at least half the time they're spelling those graphemes that you're teaching them explicitly, right? Which is also can be happening. Lots of practice with spelling, using also, like Jess talked about in early literacy, using that spelling sort of results or looking at kids spelling really as a window into word reading, or like I was just teaching spelling in my graduate class the other day. So thinking about that as like an X-ray basically of your student's hypothesis about the English code. So using that spelling data to then inform instruction, especially for kids, which we think about a lot, Jess and I, and all of us probably, kids that really do struggle with reading. So making sure in the early grades you're doing that, then being able to layer in some of those high utility spelling rules. Then eventually we're layering in, really teaching kids explicitly how to spell high utility affixes, prefixes, and suffixes, connecting those to meaning, talking about how with multisyllabic words that, you know, the phonology is going to diverge, the sounds are going to diverge, but the spell or that's going to diverge, but the spelling is going to remain the same. My favorite example, because I mess this up a lot, is national or nation to national, right? We have the same base, we add that suffix, then the actual sound, the meat is going to change, but the spelling remains.
Brennan, can I ask you one more question quickly?
Of course.
So does this phonics scope and sequence always match a spelling scope and sequence? Is that the same, different, or what do you see? Like it, because like, you know, you'll see like phonics programs have a scope and sequence. Sometimes there's a little attention to spelling, but I've seen spelling programs that go so much deeper into like rules and so forth. So should I be looking tomorrow when I wake up at 5:30 in the, well, tomorrow I'm not waking up at 5:30. It's a holiday, but should I be looking for a new scope and sequence for spelling, or am I fine with my phonics scope and sequence?
My answer right now, because this is where we need to go with a little bit of the research. We don't have a great spelling. This is what you should use for your spelling scope and sequence. It really is all about the environment our kids are in, right? The phonics scope and sequence, kind of my recommendation, following that, filling in those gaps that we're not getting then, and when we're looking at their spelling, right? If we're really struggling with short vowel sounds, blends are a killer, right, in early literacy. Those vowel teams are like the bane of all of our existence, right? When we have those variant vowels, they're 3 different ways to spell like that R, right? The bossy R pattern, or making sure that we're spending time on that. I will say I'm doing a spelling intervention study now where I'm training parents to deliver a spelling program at home with their kids. And that scope and sequence really is pretty aligned to a phonics scope and sequence, but they're spending a little more time on those orthographic rules. And also they're embedding, which I really want to hit here, is these high frequency irregular words are really beneficial when kids practice spelling them. Was, the, as, right, does, all of those that don't follow our typical one-to-one correspondences in English really do benefit when we have kids practice spelling those for their word reading skills, but really in their spelling skills as well. So that's the most informed answer I have as far as a spelling scope and sequence, really filling in gaps. But good, there's not a ton of spelling programs, but the ones that are out there, that couple of them, or one of them that we have in our meta-analysis that had a few studies, the scope and sequence is pretty similar to a reading or phonics scope and sequence.
Jessica, I have a question for you. Faith, I'm sorry,
Sure.
I'm a little hyper today. A lot of things happened at work that made me hyper today. So in terms of spelling, do you have any recommendations? There's been a lot of debates on the Literacy View about sound walls, and there's been a lot of talk in the research about phonemic awareness and connecting it to orthographic mapping. From a spelling perspective, how does this impact sound walls, which I'm still struggling with myself in the field, because I'm hearing so many different things and so much BS, and even called Faith after work today. I was like fuming about some of the BS because, you know, you have to have really hard conversations. So how does this spelling piece tie into either word walls or sound walls, both, neither, or Faith likes to do multiple choice polls on our Literacy View podcast. So maybe that'll show up tomorrow. But yeah, Jessica, if you could give.
Yeah, I mean, I am a fan of sound wall, and people use this term differently, but so I'll define what I mean, which is you show the main like letter representation, and then underneath it in a column, the alternative spellings or representations that make the same sound. So I do think that is really helpful for reading and spelling, because students are able to see the alternatives that are making the same sound. So they recognize, oh, I hear that sound.
Can you give like some simple examples for our teachers and educators in the field, like maybe some words and so forth, to make it easier?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's definitely lots of, if you look at a wall that has these columns where they're making the same sound representation, you'll have that for consonants. Vowels are probably where you think really easily of all the alternative spellings. So you would have, back when I had this set up in my classroom, I would have short vowels on one side, long on the other. And then under the long A, for example, we would also have the A like line for a consonant, magic E or silent E. And then we'd have an AI and an AY and an EA and EIGA, depending on how many different patterns you've taught for what A can look like in a word. And so when a student is going to, to read or spell, that can serve for them as, especially if it's there somewhere they can look at, it can serve as a quick guide or representation of what pattern they can use to represent that sound. When I use this a lot for spelling with students, and we used a lot, especially for long vowels, where they'd be spelling a word and they would have the word, they'd sort of be able to easily think about the consonants they hear, and then they would look up and they'd sort of decide like, oh, what spelling pattern makes sense here? And some of those spelling patterns have consistencies. So obviously the silent E, the magic E have consistencies in when they'll be used. But other times it's really just seeing it a lot in writing and reading and becoming familiar with when you see those different patterns used. So I do think that gives students a nice representation of, every time I hear an E sound or an A sound or an O sound, here are the options. Here are the things that this could be when I look at a word and I'm hearing that sound, or when I'm spelling a word and I hear that sound.
But you're not talking about mouth movements, like photographs of lips.
I'm not. No.
Oh my God, thank you, Faith. Thank you. That's so validating. All I hear, even though, and this comes back to why we're so happy to have you guys here, because I still hear so many people, even when the research and evidence is out there, people will challenge even Faith and myself, who are not researchers. We're just interpreting it, with our guests and our researchers. And, like, the bottom line is, people like myself in the field, we just want clarity. Teachers are so tired of mixed messages. People are so tired of, like, sometimes people will visit their classroom that might not even know as much as they do. And then you're given directives. And then it's like a game of telephone that went bad. It's like you get one message, then the message changes. And it's like, how do we, like, enough is enough. Like, we're so tired of it. And you'll even see things sometimes in writing that, districts are doing, or publications that are coming out, or that, people look up to will put out something that's not right. And that's fine. But, like, how do we get, like, that clarity so that we're not always, like, frustrated? It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating.
Can you hear this?
What did you say?
I'm saying, can you hear the frustration? One of the reasons we do this show is to kind of, like, try to sort through what's real and what's not, because the louder voices seem like it's over. And then people, if you say it enough times, people believe it's true. Right. And that's what's out there on social media. There are these repetitive messages that people see, and they hear people who they think know, and yet they don't know any more than the next person. And it's misinterpreted, and teachers are left to have to sort through the mess.
Mhm.
So,
Or sometimes they're given a directive, you have to do this,
Right,
you have to do
right.
this. So that's
Yeah.
why I love, it's funny. My partner, Paul, he was like, wow, you really love the literacy view. It's like therapy for you. And it's kind of like therapy. And it's almost like I'm like talking to the greatest people that just hear you. And it's so special to have this opportunity to speak to you, Jessica, and to speak to you, Brennan, and to text Faith after work, because you get to talk to people that live and breathe this work, and follow the evidence and know the research. And I think the important thing is, new studies come out, people have to be prepared to pivot, and I think it's our responsibility. When we know better, we do better. And, staying active, but also being brave to ask those tough questions. It's not always brave doing that in the field. It's kind of scary sometimes. It's really overwhelming. You could be sitting at a meeting and it's like, do you stay quiet? Do you not stay quiet? How do you not sound rude? How do you not sound like you're being defiant or disrespectful? It's hard.
I will say that I like your analogy of like it's telephone, and I don't know if our phones do this anymore, but maybe I'm aging myself. When your phone used to like pick up a signal from someone else talking and you'd be like, who's talking? Sometimes it's like that too. You're like getting a totally different message at the same time. To me, I think to me as a researcher and a teacher educator, the most important thing for me is valuing teachers' knowledge and expertise and helping them, especially when they're training, develop as problem solvers, their ability to take evidence, to take that information and to apply it in their own teaching context, because none of these things can be a one size fits all approach. Nothing is ever going to work 100% of the time for every class you teach, every student you teach, every school you're in, every state you're in, district you're in, year you're teaching in. Things change and evolve. And so I think we have to be, as educators, really good users of knowledge and information in order to problem solve and make decisions. And so within that, I think the role of those of us who do research is to clearly communicate what are the most essential pieces of this that need to be translated into classrooms. So if we think of spelling, or if we think of different types of reading instruction, what are the most essential instructional routines, approaches to use? And then what other information do teachers need to collect to help them make really good decisions within that approach? And there are certainly things that need the BS button that are like, that should not be an option in your list of things. Like, we know that that's not going to help students, or at least most students. But that's why it is hard to translate the science of reading into like black and white guidelines for classrooms, is that there has to be some flexibility that comes from teachers' judgment and knowledge and expertise on what's going to work best for their students in different settings.
So if you were to tell our listeners a way to cement the word in memory. So Brennan, you mentioned before, words that are difficult to spell because they don't have a predictable pattern in it. How do you cement these words in memory? If you were to offer some strategies to our listeners, what would they be to go from being exposed to something in spelling to being able to say, yeah, I got this? Like how do you get from point A to point B to cement those words in memory? That's part one. Part two is, what do you think of a speech to print approach? Because it starts with spelling. And there's some evidence for at least K-1 starting with the spoken word and starting with spelling first to get from encoding to decoding?
I'll answer the first question first and then answer the trickier second question, or the more nuanced second question. But I think if we're thinking about individual words that are really tricky, I was working last summer with a 7th grader who had really hard time with words like said, does, the, all the words that you're describing that are just not super, phonetically spelled. Like we don't have the one-to-one correspondences for those vowel teams don't represent the typical spelling, or the sound. So with that, the compelling evidence from, I think, the meta-analysis plus some other studies that have been done are really to practice, again, spelling those words and really drawing kids' attention to the regular or the expected parts and the irregular, the unexpected parts. So like in the word said, right? Looking at the S, the S, and the D, those are expected sounds. And then that AI, that's an unexpected sound. AI usually says A, not like in said. We need to remember this part by heart, which is where I think the heart word terminology sort of comes from, is remembering those parts by heart. And so really color coding that, whatever needs to be done. If you want to draw, I think, a heart around it, that's fine, right? Whatever works in that way, but drawing kids' attention to that and then practicing that through Elicona boxes is fine, right? Works.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's so funny that you mentioned that word. I was going to ask you about that word said. So I've seen people draw a heart on top. I've also seen people draw the irregular part in different colors. Now, if I was taking that kind of word and putting it on a sound wall, where would I put it and what would that look like?
Yeah, so I don't know if I put the word there. That's sort of, the unexpectedness of it. My last taught 2nd and 3rd grade with kids who had dyslexia, and we sort of had like a call like this like odd word, like sort of like separate sort of area wall where we had those high frequency regular words.
So we can really still put because we still have like a word wall where we put words like that so that kids could still use it like on a phonics test and they know, and they, not that you're just putting a million words, but we're still talking about the tricky. Okay, good. That's really helpful.
This is a scaffold, just as Jess was talking about with the vowels, exactly. Just as that like scaffold and like the words they're going to be using a lot, and then they can map those words right. The goal is hopefully over time spelling them, reading them into the more long-term memory.
Wow, that's really helpful.
So I mentioned before speech to print approach. Now, a word like said would not be irregular. It would just be an infrequent spelling pattern for the sound e. So if you were to put words up on a board, it would start, let's say, with the sound e. And then, of course, it could be a word like bet, with the most basic spelling of e. It could be EA, like in head, as a spelling pattern. And AI would be something that would be an infrequent spelling pattern, but like in again. So, again, that's why I asked you about.
Yeah, I can answer this. So I think really, again, evidence from this meta plus everything else that I'm aware of, studies, other meta-analytic reviews, this idea of the speech to print or print to speech, it really is. It's both. We have to integrate these. I think our meta-analysis, other work that's looked at in reading interventions, Colby Hall has a great meta-analysis of 40 years of reading intervention research for kids with dyslexia. That integration is really important and not sort of, we like these these false dichotomies. What do we do first? Speech to print to speech. It really is that integration. I think especially from this, that shows that doing that doesn't make sense. To me, even that sounds cognitively demanding, thinking about these irregular spellings and the sound wall and having those. I really think both from the start make a lot of sense just based on how we're learning and we're reading and we're writing. We want to draw, we want to integrate, we want to draw upon the speech and the print to help kids crack the code. Jess, what do you think? Do you have anything you want to add?
I think that's a great answer. In terms of the sound wall, when you were giving the example and asking about said, I always had on a sound wall a little card at the side that said oddball. And we had that even at the very beginning when we were not talking about any oddballs. We just had that there because there's always going to be things that don't fit within these explicit rules we have already talked about, or these explicit patterns we've already talked about. So said would probably be a lot of sort of high frequency, irregular words we'd put under oddballs. But depending on the students and where they were at, so I didn't want to overload by putting many, many different patterns under a sound or under a letter if that wasn't going to come up in words that they were reading. But sometimes, I think this happened almost every group I ever taught, that we'd be going through and the students would say, oh, but said says eh, can we put AI under the E, under our short E? And so they would often take like a little card and they'd write and add stuff to it that I didn't plan to add. But if they're making that connection and that's helping them solidify that connection, then who am I to have a rigid rule that doesn't allow them to make a connection that's working for them? For a lot of other students, that connection is not help. It's much easier to just think, said doesn't come up a lot. I don't hear that pattern a lot. It's easier for me to just recognize I'm going to see SAID many times when I read and write, and it'll be something that they sort of learn as a whole word, what it looks like. But I think kind of that flexibility of either approach, when you have words that don't strictly follow patterns or rules, helps students.
Well, wouldn't you also, Jessica, especially with your whole focus on morphology, wouldn't that be a prime time to bring in the word say and kind of start showing them say, says, said, the variations and this flexibility that goes along with that? I mean, I also think that that would help cement the word, kind of the variations in how to use a word like that.
Faith,
Yeah.
what grade are you talking about? I'm just curious.
I mean, I've done that with first grade. I really have with, say, saying, says, said. Obviously not at the very beginning. At first, I would get just, say, and, but then when I'm bringing it into the word said, that to me is a great moment to bring in the meaning piece. So again, at the right moment,
Yeah.
that might work.
Yeah. I do think that's the qualifier, is like if they are at a place where that is going to benefit them and make sense and not just overload with information that's going to make things seem too confusing.
Right. Yeah,
But
Jessica,
yeah,
what
for
you
sure,
said kind of
things-
makes sense, because it's almost like in my one of the sites where I work, there's been like a discussion of co-constructing together and having the kids give input and telling you a little bit. That shows that they're ready, I guess, right? Rather than that cognitive overload. Because I could see some of my struggling learners maybe being sometimes overloaded if I go too far.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I do think this is where the idea of synthetic phonics comes from, is not overloading students with all of the, like, sticking with, this is a consistency. When you see this letter or this letter team, it's going to make this sound. Let's practice that until that becomes regular for you, and you recognize that. Then we're going to add another layer of complexity and flexibility to that thinking. But I definitely think we should, and I say this knowing that it is tricky. It requires a certain depth of knowledge of reading development to do this. But if a student suggests, because they're reading a word, spelling a word, or saying a sound, that they are prepared to add more complexity to their knowledge, we shouldn't hold them back from that. Because we're only on lesson 10. We can't talk about that yet. I mean, if they're already making that connection, then we should support them in making that connection. But it can be tricky because, one, it requires the teacher to have a level of knowledge about reading development and orthography and phonics instruction to make those kind of zoom those connections forward. And it can be tricky when you have multiple kids in the group and not all of them are prepared for that, to be making those kinds of connections.
You said this, and we'll wrap up now, but I love how you said a couple of times.
We can't wrap up until after you say what you're saying, and then you have to do your BS and cheers part.
What I wanted to say was, see, now you made me forget. You took me off my train of thought. I know you said a number of times, Jessica, about teacher knowledge. And we always talk about that on the Literacy View because, if you have the knowledge to be able to pivot, it shouldn't just be about following something with fidelity, which again, if you're brand new to a program, you first have to learn it. But you should be able to start seeing the holes because there are holes in every program. And then knowing what to do to fill those gaps. So, I usually do what would you call BS on out there in the research literacy world between the two of you, since there are two of you? Can you come up with 3 things between the two of you that you think there's a lot circulating out there that you would call BS on?
I'll start. This is an easy one for me. These days, I think it's blindly following any sort of program or approach, and like not pivoting your own, reflecting on if that approach or program is actually, grounded in research or evidence. I think that is right now what I'm seeing a lot of is, this is my approach, this is what I'm trained in, this is my program, whatever it is, curriculum, I don't care, and just blindly following that and whoever else is using it, and saying this is it, and this is sort of the gold standard, and it's going to, solve the literacy crisis. I think that's a big one for me. For me these days, that was pretty easy to articulate because it's been on my mind a lot.
Anything else, Jessica? Do you have anything to add to that?
That was a good one. I think if we stick with spelling and what we've been talking about, I think, I guess spelling and reading, but encouraging students to sound things out in order to read or spell a word that includes patterns that they have never been exposed to before. I think sometimes we just think that asking students to sound it out is phonics instruction. And if you're asking a 5-year-old to sound out the word light, why would they know that IGH says I, unless anyone has ever told them that before? So I think being aware that that the parts of words interact with our ability to successfully read and spell those words.
I won't push you for a third.
Our third one.
You don't have to push for a third, but what about cheers?
Give me a chance. I was just going to say, between the two of you, what would you cheer about if you could come up with 3 things that you see in research or just generally what's out there now that you are pleased with what you're seeing?
I'll start this one and then you can go, Brandon. I think in research, and where a lot of reading researchers, especially folks that I talk to a lot, are thinking and moving, is thinking of how to develop instructional routines, programs, and support teachers in developing instructional routines that teach students how to be flexible in the way that they attack words and read words. I think it's such an important part of developing students as readers, and it is a huge barrier for students who have reading disabilities or who struggle with reading, because they learn a really consistent, explicit approach, which is very effective for foundational reading skills. And then we stop and we don't teach them how to translate that into being flexible readers. And that holds them back from becoming more efficient. So I
love that. Exactly.
I love that we're talking more about that.
Great. Anything else, Brennan? Do you have 1 or 2 ideas you want to talk about to give a cheers to?
Yeah, I think in reading and writing intervention research and in like practice as well, what I'm seeing being implemented is sort of a focus on the science of learning and learning science too, embedded in the interventions that we're developing, embedded in practice too, thinking about retrieval practice, distributed learning over time. And also there's been some interesting work, a little more in math than in reading intervention, but really looking at interleaving of skills as being potentially beneficial. Not as much, I'm not seeing as much in the reading and writing part as much as math, but it's exciting to sort of think about sort of recentering this, all the sciences of learning, of reading, of writing, of literacy, of just being working with kids and overall making sure that they're, have great outcomes to succeed. So that's something I'm excited about.
Well, it's been a real delight meeting with both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything that we forgot to ask you that you would like to share?
I don't think so. I think that thanks so much for having us. I think if maybe we can share, Brennan led an article recently that was in the Reading League Journal that was translating these findings for practitioners. So we could potentially share a link to that with you so you could, or if your readers are interested, they can, maybe I won't say contact us because that's going to turn into a lot of emails, but we can share it with you all.
I'll tell you this, Judy and I will put it in our newsletter.
I knew you were going to say that. It's the No BS Press. Yes, you have to go to the literacyview.com, subscribe to the Literacy View, No BS Literacy Press, and then you will get it in the newsletter.
All right.
And
I have one more question for the two of you.
Judy,
I want to get to know them as people. If I spotted the two of you on the road or in your car, what music would you be listening to, Brennan? And then Jessica, you're next.
Okay, today I've been listening a lot lately, which is a little random, but not so. Ariana Grande, her new album, her old albums, her within Wicked is great. So
you're getting ready for Wicked. Yeah.
Getting ready for Wicked. Lots of Ariana Grande, Eternal Sunshine. I like pop music. She's one of my favorite pop icons. So
nice. Jessica, what about you?
I will probably be listening to like alternative rock from the 90s that I haven't updated in the last 20 years, or always musical theater too is on the.
Oh, that's so nice. List. See, we learned that Tim Shanahan is a Swiftie. He's coming back.
Oh, all right.
I would like to know the genres of music that our guests like, right, Faith?
You know what? You could come to the Literacy View for fun facts.
And music chats.
Here we go.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
you for having us.
Great. Good night.
Thank you.
Night.